So you want to conquer the largest empire in the known world. You need soldiers, horses, food, weapons, ships, engineers, roads, and siege equipment. And you need money to pay for all of it before you've won a single battle. That's the paradox at the heart of Alexander's story. Conquest costs money before conquest creates money. And the empire he was marching toward, Persia, held more silver, more gold, and more administrative wealth than any kingdom in the Mediterranean world had ever seen. So the real question isn't just how Alexander won his battles. It's whether he was conquering an empire or acquiring the largest treasury on earth. Before he could spend a single coin of Persian wealth, he first had to build and finance the machine that would go out and capture it. That machine didn't start with Alexander. It started with his father. Before Philip II took the throne, Macedon was a rough, cash-poor kingdom on the edge of the Greek world, easy to overlook and easy to invade. Philip changed that. He reformed the army into a professional standing force, paid in regular wages rather than seasonal levies, which meant soldiers trained year-round instead of returning to their farms. That kind of professional army is expensive to maintain, but Philip had something most of his rivals didn't: access to the silver and gold mines of the region, wealth he used to fund training, equipment, and the long spears and tight formations that made Macedonian infantry so effective. By the time Alexander inherited the throne, he wasn't just inheriting a kingdom. He was inheriting a fully financed war machine, one built specifically for the question every conqueror eventually has to answer. How do you pay an army that's about to march thousands of miles from home? Because once that army starts moving, it becomes something more than a fighting force. It becomes a moving economy. Every soldier needs pay, and pay that arrives late, or not at all, is how armies mutiny. Every soldier needs food, and tens of thousands of men, marching through foreign territory, need a constant flow of grain, something no single region can supply forever without support. Horses need fodder and care. Weapons and armor wear out and must be replaced. Engineers and siege crews have to haul and maintain the machinery capable of breaking through city walls. And behind all of it sits a support system of laborers, medics, and suppliers, keeping the whole operation from collapsing. This was not simply an army crossing Anatolia, Syria, Egypt, Mesopotamia, Persia, and eventually Central Asia. It was a supply chain thousands of miles long, consuming food, metal, animals, and money every single day it existed. And the farther that supply chain stretched from home, the more urgent one question became. What happens when the army outruns the treasury that's supposed to be feeding it? The answer arrived in the form of Persia itself. The Achaemenid Empire had spent nearly 2 centuries accumulating wealth through taxation and tribute, and ancient sources describe royal treasuries at cities like Susa and Persepolis, holding staggering quantities of silver and gold. When Alexander's forces took control of these centers, the character of the campaign shifted. What had been an expensive gamble financed largely on borrowed confidence became something increasingly funded by the resources of the very empire it was dismantling. But stored wealth sitting in a treasury vault isn't the same as usable capital. Coins locked away don't pay soldiers, feed horses, or repair siege engines on their own. Alexander needed to convert that captured wealth into active circulation, wages, supplies, and political leverage. And doing that meant he needed more than gold. He needed a functioning economic system to move it through, which is why Alexander made a decision that reveals more about his strategic thinking than any battlefield victory. He did not tear down the economic infrastructure of the empire he'd just conquered. Persian tax collection, regional administration, and local governance had been running for generations, and rebuilding all of it from nothing would have been slower and more costly than simply taking control of the machine that already existed. So in many regions, local elites, tax structures and governors remained in place, now answering to a new authority. This wasn't generosity. It was pragmatism. The smartest conquerors don't burn the system they intend to profit from. They capture it intact. But this created its own tension. How exactly do you rule an empire when your army is Macedonian, your population is overwhelmingly Persian, Egyptian, and Babylonian, and the very tax system funding you was designed by the people you just defeated? That question mattered, because wealth is worthless if it can't move. An empire isn't just territory shaded on a map, it's a network of movement. Control over ports along the eastern Mediterranean, river routes through Mesopotamia, and roads built generations earlier by the Persian kings themselves meant that soldiers, grain, and tax revenue could actually travel where they were needed. Egypt's harbors and Mesopotamia's rivers weren't just symbols of conquest. They were the arteries that connected taxation, military resupply, and long-distance trade into a single functioning system. Without that infrastructure, even a captured treasury and a functioning tax base would have been isolated pockets of wealth with no way to reach the army that needed them. But every mile of expansion came with a hidden cost. New provinces needed garrisons, and garrisons needed permanent pay. Conquered populations occasionally rebelled, and putting down resistance drained resources that could have funded further campaigns. Supply lines stretching across Central Asia became more expensive and more vulnerable the farther they extended from any secure base. Soldiers and allied commanders expected rewards for their loyalty, and those rewards added up. Every new territory brought in new revenue, yes, but it also brought a new border to defend, a new bureaucracy to maintain, and new enemies to manage. Which raises an uncomfortable possibility. Was Alexander building a self-sustaining empire, or simply expanding the bill faster than any system could realistically keep paying it? Because gold and silver were never really the empire's most valuable resource. People were. Soldiers who fought and marched, farmers and laborers who produced the food and materials the army consumed, skilled workers in captured cities, and administrators who kept taxation flowing. These were the actual engine behind every coin in the treasury. And that engine had a human cost. Populations were displaced, cities were forced to adapt to new rulers overnight, and the labor behind Alexander's wealth was rarely optional. Ancient empires weren't powered by coins alone. They were powered by the people who grew the grain, paid the taxes, and built the roads that made everything else possible. And that dependency exposed the empire's deepest weakness. This entire system, the treasuries, the tax networks, the trade routes, the loyalty of conquered elites, depended overwhelmingly on one man's personal authority. Governing territory that stretched from Greece to the Indus River was already a logistical nightmare, made harder by the ongoing tension between Macedonian tradition and Persian-style imperial administration. And Alexander had built no clear system for what would happen to any of it if he weren't the one holding it together. When he died in Babylon, there was no established mechanism for transferring power, no institution designed to outlast him. The empire's greatest vulnerability wasn't its size. It was that so much of its economic and political architecture had been built around a single, irreplaceable person. In the end, Alexander's conquest wasn't just a military triumph. It was an economic operation, powered by taxation, captured wealth, trade infrastructure, and human labor on a scale the ancient world had rarely seen. For a time, conquest generated its own fuel. Treasuries paid for armies, and armies captured more treasuries. But every expansion also created new permanent costs, and the system had no answer for what came after the man who built it was gone. So the real question isn't whether Alexander built an empire. It's whether he built a machine that could only survive by continuing to expand forever.